Chair now recognizes Mr. Kiley for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Arias, you're with CARB. You're the chief of the Transportation and Toxics Division, correct?
Correct.
Thank you for being here with us today. But I did have to ask, are you an elected official?
I am not.
Is anyone at CARB an elected official?
Some of our board members are, yes.
But are they acting in a elected capacity when they make policy at CARB?
Some of them are elected, but they are all appointed by our Senate and governor.
They're appointed, not elected.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, they originally may be elected
So
officials.
you took this opportunity upon yourselves to issue this new regulation banning non-electric trains, is that correct?
The staff promulgated the rule and took it to the board for their consideration, and they adopted
So
it.
it wasn't voted on by the legislature.
It was not.
It wasn't voted on by the people of California.
It was not.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm very glad you called this hearing because we have really a crisis of democratic legitimacy in California, where we have an agency, a massive bureaucracy, CARB, that is making tectonic changes to our society, not just in California, but across the country, without any measure of democratic accountability, and is enacting harebrained scheme after harebrained scheme that wouldn't even survive whatever modicum of rationality might be present in the supermajority legislature. And it's having dramatic impacts on our state. I mean, you could flip through the pages of dystopian fiction and not find an entity quite like CARB in terms of just how completely out of control and disconnected from the real world it has become. And I think that this regulation under consideration today, banning non-electric trains, is a perfect example of that. So Mr. Alvaria, you testified about how currently railroads are already the most environmentally friendly way to transport freight across the country, correct?
That's correct. Today, railroads contribute 2% of transportation-related greenhouse gas emissions, while our competitor trucking contributes 23%.
And you've also testified that the technology to comply with this regulation is not currently in existence. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that because of this, short lines such as your company or others may be forced to shut down. Is that correct?
That's correct. To comply with the CARB rule as written, many short lines in the state of California cannot comply. They'd go bankrupt. And as I explained, my railroad, we'd have to defer lots of other safety-driven projects in order to comply with the locomotive upgrade.
So this would shift rate to from more environmentally friendly to less environmentally friendly modes of transport. Is
That's
that correct?
correct. It'd push more to truck and have a worse impact on emissions.
So the whole purpose of this regulation, the ostensible purpose, which is to reduce emissions, would actually do just the opposite. It's a self-undermining, self-defeating regulation. But of course, it does a lot more than that in terms of the collateral damage or costs. You testified that this would raise costs for consumers, correct?
That's correct.
Making the experience of inflation worse in California and across the country. Is that
Yes,
correct?
That's correct.
And in addition to that, you'd have more vehicles on the road, which would create more traffic for drivers, I assume.
More traffic, more congestion, and there was 6,000 deaths related to heavy trucks last year, and that's been increasing year over year. To put more trucks on our roads, that number, unfortunately, would probably increase.
So more wear and tear on the roads, more accidents, more injuries, more death.
That's correct.
And then you've also testified, Mr. Yall, about some of the other costs in terms of construction costs, correct?
That's correct.
Is it fair to say that this regulation, by increasing the cost of construction, both in terms of the cost of materials and the cost of their transport, would increase the already high cost of housing in California?
That's correct, yes.
And you also testified that it would make it more difficult for us to build new infrastructure. Is that correct?
Yes, our concern is that the funds that both from passenger rail operators and freight rail operators that would have been used for capital improvements, which is what we do, what our industry does, is going to get diverted to this effort, and there will be a significant decrease in available funding through that, in addition to making the cost of projects bigger and more expensive, so your dollar goes just less further.
So if I have this right, we have an unelected, not democratically accountable body that has decided on its own to make policy, not just for California, but effectively for the entire country, and has done so in the name of reducing emissions, but has come up with a policy that will actually increase emissions, while also increasing costs and inflation for consumers by putting more vehicles on the road, creating more traffic, creating more wear and tear on our roads, reducing our road quality, creating more accidents, meaning more injuries and more death, increasing the cost of construction, increasing the costs of housing, and making it more difficult to build new infrastructure. I'm glad we had this hearing, Mr. Chair, because I think this is exactly the wrong policy for California and for our country. I yield back.